This is Ken Gale for Environment TV Weekly News. The ocean covers well over 70% of the Earth's surface, and sea surface temperatures are a good indication of the global warming aspect of climate chaos. This graph from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is available on the EPA website, shows how the average surface temperature of the world's ocean has changed from 1880 to 2013. The shaded band shows the range of uncertainty in the data based on the number of measurements collected and the precision of the methods used. You can see that the uncertainty has decreased as technology has improved. This Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change map from last year shows average sea surface temperatures between 1901 and 2012. It's based on a combination of direct measurements and satellite measurements. A plus sign on the map means the trend is statistically significant. White areas do not have enough data to calculate reliable long-term trends. I find it interesting that both the Arctic and Antarctic oceans are in the not enough data category. Climate chaos and global warming are much greater in those areas. I don't think they're hiding information. I suspect they probably didn't have enough data from the early and mid-20th centuries to show a trend. These two maps are from the Malaysian Meteorological Department and are of the Pacific Ocean, centered a little north of the equator. You can make out Mexico, Central America, and Northwest South America on the right, Hawaii in the center, and Australia, New Guinea, and the Philippines on the left. The Malaysian Meteorological Department is predicting a weak El Niño this year due to sea surface temperatures. These two July 2nd, 2014 maps show weekly average sea surface temperatures analysis and sea surface temperatures anomalies. Data from those two maps are used to predict El Niños, which are important in predicting winter climate. The Citizens United and McCutcheon Supreme Court cases allow polluters, such as fossil fuel companies and nuclear utilities, to put about as much money as they want to influence elections and to influence elected officials. Politicians have been quick to use anger over that to raise money for themselves, but have been very slow to have legislation against it. But here's some good news out of California. The governor of California issued a proclamation on July 18th that he is allowing the California legislature to put the overturned Citizens United Act on the November ballot. Meanwhile, in Washington, H.J. Res. 119, the new bill following the language of S.J. Res. 19 in the Senate, already has 108 co-sponsors. Those bill numbers seem like numbers for non-binding resolutions, not actual laws. Calls into organizations that can give me more information have not been returned. In last week's news, I talked about earthquakes in general and about earthquakes near nuclear power plants, such as Indian Point, just north of New York City. From Tim Judson of the wonderful organization NEARS, the Nuclear Information Resource Service, comes this information. This month, the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission told Entergy, the owner of Indian Point, that they needed to conduct more analyses into the potential impacts of earthquakes on the plant. The NRC listed 21 power plants in the country that needed to file additional studies by 2017 because their quake risks have changed since the original design and construction of those plants. Now let's see now, 2017. And the earthquake that damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nukes happened in 2011. What took them so long? I guess we should be grateful that they responded at all. Indian Point has been operating without a license since last September. And this bears repeating. After the Virginia earthquake that may have damaged a nuclear power plant there, the NRC said that Indian Point is designed to withstand a 5.8 earthquake within a 50-mile radius of the plant. Why did they put it that way? An earthquake 50 miles away is never as bad as one right nearby. And the Ramapo seismic zone is right nearby. So what is Indian Point really designed to withstand? The NRC said at a public hearing in 2011 that Indian Point has only 100 health and safety exemptions. That's how the commissioner said it. I was there. Only 100 health and safety exemptions. I have a problem with every word in that sentence. As Tim Judson added in his article, quote, "No plant in history has ever closed due to an expiring license." I want to point out an anniversary that just occurred and an upcoming event that will commemorate it. This is known mostly to the Navajo community in New Mexico. July 16th was the 35th anniversary of the worst nuclear disaster in U.S. history, when a dam burst near Church Rock, New Mexico, and miles of uranium mill tailings were washed down the Rio Puerco. It killed hundreds of head of cattle, thousands of head of sheep, and people are still dying from cancer from those uranium mill tailings. I've always wondered why so few people know about this, even in the environmental activist community. It occurred a few months after the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant had its partial meltdown. Now, perhaps people were tired about hearing about nuclear stuff. Perhaps the industry learned from TMI how to keep such news out of mainstream news. Perhaps it's because it happened in a sparsely populated area way out west. Perhaps people couldn't identify with the folks who died from it or lost all their sheep and cattle. But as the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history, it should be noted by all of us, whether we're Navajo or not. There will be films, a discussion, and a concert on indigenous resistance and liberation, and the Rio Puerco disaster will be part of that evening. It's Monday, July 28th at 6:30 p.m. at Interference Archive, 131 8th Street near 3rd Avenue in Brooklyn. Take the F, G, or R trains to 4th Avenue, 9th Street.
Hi Pete, welcome to Environment TV.
Good to be here. Thanks, John.
Let's talk about your recent trip to Detroit. I know they're shutting people's water out there and turning it totally off. And why don't you give us a little info about it first?
Yeah, right now about 300,000 residents of Detroit are under the threat of losing their water. I believe it's 54% of the water and sewage department's industrial accounts are past due over 2 months. About 48% of the residential accounts are past due over 2 months. And the city has stated that if you are more than 2 months or $150 behind on your water bill, they will shut off your water. And water, I spoke to one resident, he said water used to be something you could put off if you didn't have the money. You know, it's a public utility, but not anymore. And so what the city of Detroit has done is they've hired a private corporation called Halmrich Wrecking Inc. And you have these vans driving around shutting off people's water. People are very upset and they're resisting. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's important to understand where this comes from. About this time last year, on July 18th, the city filed for bankruptcy. The governor, Rick Snyder, appointed an emergency manager for Detroit, an unelected person named Kevin Orr. Kevin Orr went down and filed for bankruptcy for the city, and since then, they've been under this fiscal pressure to really tighten their belt. We're talking about pretty heavy, substantial pension reductions, and this sort of water collections rampage that's going on right now is also a result of that bankruptcy, of the bankruptcy proceedings. So where does this bankruptcy come from? A hefty chunk of that is debt that the city owes to none other than Wall Street and America's largest commercial banks. The city's former mayor, a guy by the name of Kwame Kilpatrick, is currently in jail. He was convicted on federal corruption charges. But before he went away in 2005, he agreed to these interest rate swap deals with Bank of America, Chase, and UBS. Kwame borrowed $3.7 billion from these banks, and when the financial market crashed in 2008, the interest rates on those loans skyrocketed. Now the city owes about $15 billion. So that's actually a massive chunk of Detroit's insolvency right there. And another piece of that is, why did the stock market crash? Because subprime loans were given to people, and when they couldn't actually, deficient, crap loans were pushed on people. Many of those people could actually have gotten a better loan, but and these were bundled and packaged and sold to investors as AAA rated loans, which of course we later learned they weren't. So when people couldn't pay those loans, they were kicked out on the curb. That sends the stock market crashing, and in a really sort of sick irony, it sends the interest rates on the municipal loans that the city of Detroit took out through the roof. The interest rates were tied to Wall Street. Wall Street tanks, interest rates go up. Now, what is happening? 300,000 people under threat of losing their water. The other major component of what's going on in Detroit right now dates back to two things: automation and globalization. At its height, Detroit had a population of 1.8 million people. That starts to decline when you see the auto manufacturers laying people off because they have machines that can do jobs cheaper than human beings, and moving factories abroad where they can exploit people for cheaper. So jobs are driving up, are going away. It's causing an exodus of people from the city of Detroit. And of course, in 2008, what happens? General Motors and Chrysler go bankrupt because people aren't buying cars when the economy crashes. Federal government goes in, bails out the big motor companies. Federal government goes in, bails out the bank. The people of Detroit got no such bailout. Now you have a population of 700,000 people surrounded by abandoned buildings, abandoned factories, abandoned homes. And now they're losing the very element that sustains life on Earth. They're losing their water. They're surrounded by the Great Lakes, the largest freshwater source in the world, and they live by a river, the Detroit River, and they actually cannot get water. The city's emergency manager, Kevin Orr, has publicly floated the idea of privatizing the city's water supply. So this is the situation, this is the reality facing Detroit now. To add to this, the city is, there are land barons emerging. And one of the major landowners now buying up cheap property is the Ilitch Holdings. It's owned by the Ilitch family. They built an empire around Caesar's Pizza. If you eat there, you're eating the pizza that has made the Ilitch family millions, billions of dollars. They own the Detroit Tigers. They own the Detroit Red Wings. They own casinos. They own the main movie theater in Detroit. And they are planning to build a new arena for the Red Wings hockey team, even though the Red Wings have a perfectly good arena, the Joe Louis Arena downtown. They're going to be building another one a few blocks away, and it's going to cost taxpayers $284 million. The taxpayers are putting up 44% of this project that the Ilitches, who have millions at their disposal, are rich enough to afford themselves. Taxpayers are putting up that money. And to add irony to this, because the Ilitches own so much property downtown, the public funds that are going to be going towards the stadium are collected from taxes downtown. So what is happening? When Ilitch Holdings pays their taxes, they are essentially reinvesting those funds in themselves in the form of building a new stadium. So that's $284 million that will not be going to bail out Detroit residents that are losing their water.
Are they actually looking at this water as a revenue stream?
Well, here's the thing. Water, there's been hardly any infrastructure improvements done in Detroit in decades. And over the last 10 years, the price of water has risen 110%. You have these, one guy showed me his water and sewage bill. The water was actually only $65. The sewage was something like $300 because the pipes and everything is so outdated. And he said they keep adding new line items under sewage. And part of the problem is it's creating these feedback loops of these issues that are compounding each other. Because the city has lost so many residents and there are so many abandoned homes, you walk around and there could be an abandoned home with just water, flowing inside, a faucet on in an abandoned home. I spoke to a representative from the Department of Water and Sewage, and he said running water in abandoned properties makes up a significant portion of the department's cost, though he couldn't even give an exact figure. It's so bad that the department, I believe on Monday, developed an app that if you see water flowing in an abandoned property, you can contact them, and they'll supposedly look at where this water is coming. They'll supposedly look into this, but it's a terrible situation. The city's been basically waterboarded economically.
Has the city thought about shutting down certain sections with like infrastructure, just literally cutting them off to like maybe save some?
Yeah, and the city has to condense. That's the real issue, and they're trying to figure out a way to do that. There's a program where people can buy abandoned properties, in certain districts for very low amount of money. But the problem is because these buildings have been neglected for so long that you can get a home for $10,000, but what's not being what the residents I spoke to said what's not being explained to people when they're buying these properties is that they're going to have to spend $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 minimum doing infrastructure improvements just to get a slip of paper from the city that says that the home they bought is inhabitable.
All right, let's speak a little bit about some of the protests and stuff that went on. Go right ahead.
Well, people are resisting. And one of my favorite stories is a woman named Valerie Blakely. She's a mother of five. Four of her children live at home. She's making breakfast for her children on last Monday morning, and she looks outside and she sees the trucks from Homrich Wrecking pull up into her driveway. She goes outside, sits on the water valve, and says, "You're not taking my water. You can call the police, but you're not taking my water." And the water guys, these two gentlemen, were like, "Okay, fine." They move down the street, and she watches as she tries to alert her neighbors, but she watches as the Homrich Wrecking cuts off water to 25 homes on her block. 25 homes. She told me now her home is like a disaster area. And she's set up, she's got stew brewing all the time, because people can't cook, right? She's got like a place where NGOs are dropping off water. But people can't bathe, they can't cook, And there was a large rally in Detroit last Friday, July 18th, 1 year since the city filed for bankruptcy, with citizens demanding that the shutoffs cease. And one of my, favorite signs is obviously, with a sense of dark humor, where do you expect us to shit? Was basically the sign, which is actually a pretty realistic question. Where do people, you can't flush your toilet, you can't cook, you can't bathe. What is going to happen to this city that has already lost so many residents? Where are they going to go now? And I would also just say that I came up, I did like man on the street interviews with people in the city, and some people were like, "I don't care about the water issue." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "I don't have a home." They're squatting in abandoned properties. There's a real issue with homelessness, with homicides because the city's police department is losing resources because there's just such vacuousness throughout the town that there's a sense of a real despair and lawlessness pervades in some of the poorest parts of the city. But residents are fighting back, and about 1,000 people rallied in downtown in Detroit on Saturday, and you really got a sense of the community coming together and saying enough is enough. There's another group called Detroit Water Brigade, which is some of the same activists that helped do Occupy Sandy here in New York City after the superstorm. They're going around delivering water to residents and letting them know where there's pickup stations. It's causing National Nurses United, which is a registered nurses union, 180,000 member union, declared Detroit a public health emergency zone. The United Nations High Commission on Human Rights has condemned what's going on, pointing out that the primary victims of these are societies, some of society's most vulnerable, including the elderly, the infirm, children. I mean, the poor. I mean, these are the people that are really bearing the brunt of the water shutoffs. And to see people that have been through so much, as I said before, economically waterboarded, resisting, it's a very powerful sight. If you think about Detroit as sort of a testing block for the cuts to public funds, the cuts to public programs that have been implemented since the Great Recession began, Detroit is like the primary example. All the problems that we have faced as a country during the Great Recession are most acutely felt in Detroit. So resistance coming from there has much wider implications than that city alone. If you are on the front lines of austerity and a strong pushback comes out of Detroit, from the front lines of austerity, it can have wider implications for this country. And other places where austerity is being implemented. America is not alone in balancing the budget on the backs of working people.
For people out there that want to get involved or want to try and help, is there someone they can go to?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at Detroit Water Brigade. They're doing some excellent work.
Did you notice the city actually doing, do they have a plan in place to like help anyone out there? I mean, I really get the feeling that the city itself is just basically not doing anything and it's just left up to the people again. That's
a good question. The High Commission on Human Rights from the UN condemns this, right? An interesting twist to this story is Detroit, the city of Detroit had a human rights division. They had an office that was particularly geared towards ensuring citizens' human rights. And over the past several years, the water department had a voluntary donation section on the water bill where you could donate 50 cents on each water bill you paid, about that approximate amount. And it would be put into a fund to help people afford their water who otherwise couldn't afford it. Over the years, the water department had collected about $1 million. So I asked the water department spokesperson, why had this fund not, that fund was activated on July 7th, a full year after they had started to gradually ramp up the water shutoffs. In July of last year, I believe they shut off about 3,500 water valves. By last June, it was up to over 7,000. So they've been gradually ramping up this campaign. But not until July 7th did they actually say, well, if you can't afford to pay for your water, we have this fund. And I asked why they had waited a year to implement this relief fund. And the water department spokesperson said they had the human rights division of the city was going to administer the funds, but they got cut in the bankruptcy. So now it took them a year, he said, to, in his words, scramble to find a charity that could administer the funds. So now, if you're like the very poorest of the city, you can have some relief. It doesn't mean your water is going to be free. You're going to have to pay 20 or 30 bucks, but there is some way of supplementing those fees. And like I said earlier, Detroit has raised the price of water 110% in the last decade, and I believe it's about 25-30% above the national average for the price of water, municipal water. Yeah, so they're already paying way too much. They're surrounded by the Great Lakes, they live on a river, and they have to pay this exorbitant fee for the basic necessity of life.
All right. From some of these protests and stuff like that, the city has actually put a stop to shutting off this water on people for 15 days, is it? What, if anything, do you think that will accomplish?
Well, it's some relief. You know, you're being waterboarded and you get a break, you get to come out for air. That's basically the situation. They've sent Detroit back to its cell where it can sort of revitalize itself and you know, get some, take a break from the constant threat of losing their water, scramble to find a way to pay bills that are, for homes that have already been shut off. You know, and the department is criticizing people that are going around for 20 bucks, they'll turn your water back on. That to me is the most, you know, reasonable measure to take. You know, you go to a businessman and he's there to turn on your water. I can't blame people for taking that option. And the city is saying that they're investigating people for turning on valves illegally that have already been shut off. I mean, it is absurd that they would put the profits that they need to raise above the human rights of people in the city. And I mentioned the city's bond deals and loans that they took from Wall Street. The water department took out a loan from Wall Street that ended up costing them $300 million. They had to pay $300 million to get out of a bond deal that they had with Wall Street because the interest rate alone would have surpassed the amount of the original loan they had actually taken. So this has direct bearing on the water situation. If we want to figure out why and who to blame, you can look no further than Chase Bank, UBS, Bank of America, and these other Wall Street institutions that made a killing out of selling out Detroit and depriving people of basic necessities.
15 days isn't a long time.
No.
What is the plan? I mean, do you see the federal government maybe stepping in after this, since obviously the city doesn't have the money or obviously the forethought to plan ahead, and what is going to happen next?
Well, the federal government stepped in when General Motors went under. And the federal government stepped in when Wall Street tanked out the economy and they were bailed out. The federal government needs to step in now more than ever and bail out the city of Detroit, bail out its citizens. The Human Rights High Commission says they're going to be communicating with the Obama administration. Joe Biden was in town actually when I was in Detroit, didn't mention the water crisis at all. He spoke to a convention of progressives that was taking place in the city, Netroots Nation, and he was feeling out his chances of becoming president, but neglected to say anything to the residents of Detroit. Again, 300,000 people who are not going to have anything flowing out of their taps in the future unless something is done by his administration. Because clearly, a city that is run by an emergency manager is not taking care of the needs of American citizens.
I got a press release from Germany Trade and Invest that I want to tell you about. The 2014 International Energy Efficiency Scorecard rated Germany the most energy efficient country in the world. Italy was number 2. The US came in 13th, which made me wonder what countries they rated. Most African countries are much more energy efficient than most, if not all, European countries. The report seems to emphasize reducing energy use, and most African countries use very little energy in the first place. And in fact, they didn't rate any African countries, and only Brazil and Central and South America. They rated only the 16 largest economies, so the US came in 13 out of 16. other bit of environmental news that is in many places on the net is Obama opening up the eastern seaboard to oil and gas exploration and approving the use of sonic cannons to do so. When it was announced, it was touted as a job creator. Ha! It's a job destroyer! There's a reason Louisiana, a southern state, has no beach tourism like, say, New Jersey. There are thousands of oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico averaging an oil leak every week. Every week. One oil spill will destroy tourism of any state nearby for months and even years as people change their vacation destinations. The Atlantic seaboard, both onshore and off, is a migration route for millions of birds, many of which will not be able to make it if an oil spill hits a crucial feeding stop. This could push several shorebird species onto the endangered list, and we do not have the moral right to do that. And then there are the sonic cannons. Whales use sound the way dogs use smell. Expect more beachings and other types of injuries to whales and dolphins, and seals, and sea turtles. And who benefits? Oil companies, of course. And it's worth adding that they use tax shelters and other tax loopholes that have been written for them to avoid paying taxes. And the people whose jobs they replace do pay taxes. The fishermen, the boat industry, the tourist industry, and all the ancillary jobs that will go when they go. Environmentally and economically, this decision by the Obama administration is disastrous. The government admits this decision will harm marine life, but they want the oil companies to have more oil to burn. Climate chaos be damned. We need system change, not climate change. This is Ken Gale for Environment TV Weekly News. When the air or water are clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one. Enough said.